All the preachers I know give sermons about love near Valentine's Day, but of course every sermon is ultimately about love. I don't know if you knew that, but every song we sing here is ultimately about love. Our committee meetings and our ministry team meetings are ultimately about love, and also our potlucks. Social justice work is about love, of course. And while you could say that our sexton, Mike Michaud, shovels and puts down salt on our front walk because we don't want to get sued, the real story is that Mike loves this church and would suffer terribly if anyone was hurt here under his watch. He always says that. I love this place. Love is all around. And it mostly doesn't look like two sexy young people gazing into each other's eyes, like the young couple who lives a few streets down from me, who I'm always finding wrapped up in each other in the park. Or the other day I saw them huddled together in a parked car. It was cold out, but the engine was running and they were giggling together over something on the phone. Love creates its own little world. Sometimes that world is a blissful bubble between lovers. Sometimes it's a community of warm acceptance gathered in a building where women get together on a Saturday morning to cut fudge into little squares and package them up in small white boxes wrapped with heart ribbon so that they can raise money to support someone else's education. In another room, someone prays or rehearses music that will minister to a worshiping congregation. In the foyer, someone collects food in bags to bring them across town to give that food away. It's all a love story. There are so many different kinds of love. We're always circling around the idea like a helicopter hovering over the Grand Canyon while the passengers try to get a good shot of the whole vast miracle of it with their little camera, and it's impossible to do that. But it's wonderful to be up there looking at something so glorious, something almost frightening in its grandeur. That's love. Love, like God, is too small a word for an enormity that no human can ever adequately express, so we just keep flying around it and looking at it from different angles, flying around it like moths around a light, sometimes smashing ourselves against that light, sometimes catching fire. Today I want to circle around one idea about love in particular, and that idea is that love leaves us helpless. This isn't something we need to discover together as though it's a surprise to anyone. It's probably not a surprise to any of you. I think we all know that love cannot fix or save or cure anyone. And so it is that love that sustains us and inspires us and gives us reason to live also is a great tragedy in our lives. And you know what? Americans don't do tragedy. We have no sense of the tragic sensibility of life. We never want to admit or talk about the tragic with our relentless cheerfulness and positivity and our phobia of impotence and powerlessness. I don't want to romanticize the tragic path of love that leads us down that road of helplessness. I just want to suggest it's a sacred path, that path. It is a road of transformation for those who consent to go down it and who do not turn back once they realize where it is leading. Vince was just volunteering to give rides. He offered to give rides, and he wound up taking a young man in his late 30s, a husband and father of 3 little kids, to chemotherapy appointments at Mass General. Vince lives in Wakefield, so this was a really generous volunteer commitment. Chemo treatments can take a long time, So when Vince told me about what he had been doing, I assumed he dropped Bob off and went and did something else for several hours and then came back and got Bob. But no, Vince said he stayed with Bob the whole time and then drove him home after his treatment. And I thought, wow, that's really generous. That is not a comfortable, easy thing. To take a stranger into the hospital for a treatment, to stay with him for hours and drive him home, because what do you talk about? How do you feel that awkward silence? Or do you? Do you talk at all if the patient is tired and not feeling well? What if he is and he doesn't want to say so? What are your obligations here? You know, a lot of people, otherwise very kind and giving people, could feel so uncomfortable with this kind of awkwardness, this helplessness and suffering, that they would stay away. They'd find a reason to not do that anymore. And I know from being a pastor for a long time that even friends do this. They just cannot remain present and feel helpless in the face of suffering. Vince didn't stay away. He kept showing up. As Vince and Bob got to know each other and open up to each other over 3 years of their relationship, they forged what was to become a very deep family bond. Bob's own father, whose name was also Vince, had died when he was just 2 years old. So Vince, our Vince, became a father to him, and Bob became like a son to Vince. Eventually, as it became clear that the treatment wasn't working, Bob expressed his hope that he would just live through Christmas, this past Christmas, for his children. He just wanted to make it through Christmas. And as he got sicker and sicker and began to die, Vince remained on that path with him. He walked Bob right up to the gates of death, where Bob passed through on December 30th. The way of love, wrote the author we know as Rumi, the mystic. The way of love is not a subtle argument. The door there is devastation. Now Vince has a new family, along with his own blood kin. But my God, what a way to get one. As love crowns, so shall she crucify, wrote the poet Khalil Gibran. But what else would we want? Do we not begin to understand finally at some point that what we have been told is happiness is no way to live and no goal to have if it means avoiding the excruciating path of transforming love? The root of the word excruciating, of course, having the same root as the word crucify. I am not romanticizing abusive relationships, which are not love. I am not suggesting either that we seek out suffering intentionally, which is masochism, unless masochism is your thing. I don't want to judge. I'm just reminding us of what we already know or suspect deep down, but have very little language to talk about in our culture, which is that the tragedies you have experienced because you loved and abided with that worthy love, even when it led you to the deepest pain you have ever known, brought you to a deeper wisdom, compassion, and sense of the sacredness of life. If it did not do that, that may not be a deficiency in you, but a deficiency in our culture that doesn't have many mechanisms by which to honor that path of love. And it instead sentimentalizes it with cliches and easy little bromides, and then runs away in search of a feel-good story with a happy ending. There are no happy endings on the road to love because there are no endings, period. And I believe that God's love is at work, even and perhaps even most powerfully in those spaces where we feel the most helpless. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who certainly had direct experience of human depravity and evil, said that at the center of this existence is a heart beating with love. And this is also my faith, even when I feel that the oppressors are all too persuasive and that our reptilian brains are overcoming our altruistic instincts. The opposite of love is not hatred, but fear. The opposite of love is not hatred, but apathy, the sense that, I can't be bothered, or I gotta protect my thing, I can't be bothered. Love bothers us because love seeks the liberation of all souls, and we cannot rest in some false sense of shallow happiness while others are not free to grow into harmony with the divine, as we say in our covenant. Love should bother us. Last week I saw an obituary for a young man who died of an overdose. His parents chose to be very open in the obituary about their son's struggle with addiction. They wanted to put the story out there as a way to encourage others to tell the truth about the devastations of addiction, to help break the silence and stigma around it. And they wrote in the obituary, the first line was, "On January 27th, 2017, our beautiful son Andrew died from an overdose of heroin. He was 23 years old." And reading this and seeing how many others have chosen in recent years to do that same thing in obituaries, to tell the truth unvarnished about their loved one's death by suicide or overdose, something occurred to me. Because that honesty and that truth was such a beacon of light, such a gift of love, it occurred to me that love may leave us helpless, but it doesn't leave us powerless. It never leaves us powerless. The way of love is not a subtle argument. The door there is devastation. But although we may be helpless to fix or cure, we are not forsaken with our helpless love. In fact, it can grant us tremendous power. A power recognized and needed as a source of fearlessness, compassion, and strength for those who also need to learn how to fly and who cannot do so unless they first learn how to fall.